Globalism is predicated on the idea that there is a freedom of travel for capital, which is money and machines, freedom of money, freedom of machines and infrastructure, and freedom of goods and services, and freedom of people to move all over the place. And so there's this idea that if one industry dies, another one will be born, and people will just move over there, and they'll have a brand new life in a brand new city. It's called labor mobility, right? So tell me, did you see in your evidence, in your experience of interviewing Youngstown, formerly the crossroads of America, right? No longer. Is labor mobility a real thing? Did people who lost their jobs in Youngstown, did they just be like, all right, guess I'll just be moving to, Silicon Valley now to partake in the new economy that has left me totally, jobless and penniless? Did you see that kind of thing happening? Labor mobility.
Yeah, I think it's not a yes or no. It's kind of a split labor market, right? So yeah, the people who grew up that were the sons and daughters of the judges in Youngstown, the doctors in Youngstown, the accountants in Youngstown, those people have high labor mobility. They're like, man, I grew up in Youngstown. I'm getting out of here. I'm gone. I'm going to Yale. I'm going to Stanford, and then I'm never coming back home. But what you have at the kind of bottom end of it is that people who are more attached, who are less kind of capable or less able to move, those are people that stay. So you have a flight out at the top, a kind of brain drain effect, but you also have a rooting down at the bottom. So you're left with, like, in some ways, the worst of both worlds. You're losing your leadership class in a place like Youngstown, but then you're concentrating some of those social challenges: addiction, crime, mental illness, alcoholism. I mean, all of those challenges that you see over and over and over in Youngstown, they become more concentrated, and then subsequently people are less able to move. So the idea is great, right? That everyone can move. We could create a ghost town out of Youngstown immediately, and everyone will scatter and come up with better opportunities. But real life doesn't work that way. There's tradition, there's culture, there's institution, there's family, there's bonds, there's incapacities, there's all of these things. And then not to mention the fact that, these cities are also propped up by the federal government. The federal government dumps in tons of money into these cities. So they're keeping these cities on life support on one hand, and on the other hand saying, why don't you leave? Why don't you move out? So we have this kind of weird paradoxical situation where nobody is willing to truly let these cities die, which I understand. It's a reasonable point of view. But then we're also setting the expectation that if you live in a dying city and you don't move, you're a loser, you're a kind of underclass moocher, you're a whatever, which is like not quite fair. It's not quite a consistent position. So, what I saw is like just sad, man. It's like people growing up in a dying town, and the kind of men are either on disability or work in the black market. You see women, like one woman that we met when we were making the film, it's like, oh yeah, I have like a stripper pole in my basement, and I give dudes like private lap dances, to get by. And then my baby daddy is in prison, and these are white working class people. And it's just like, you kind of see these stories and these situations, and you're like, wow, how are we even going to contemplate navigating out of this? And especially when a leadership class that half of it, the kind of Republican, conservative establishment, I don't think has a good understanding of these lives. And the other half actually just degrades and despises these people. And it's a recipe that the working class of all racial backgrounds is unrepresented in politics. And therefore the solutions that we come up with sound good for people that are kind of, graduate degree level education and up. But once they actually trickle down and filter down to people on the street and in these communities, are just hopelessly out of touch.
Yeah. I remember back in 2014 and 15, even 2012, when all this race stuff started really kicking back up again. And if you look at Google search results for intersectionality and a few other search terms, you can see it's like the 2011, just straight up. So around 2011, 2012, when all the race talk started up again, my first thought was like, are you kidding me? This is a class. It's class. We're talking about class thing here. And the underclass of America is the one that's paying the price. White, black, brown, whatever the case may be. People living in areas where there's just been stripped of economic opportunity, stripped of their community, stripped of any hope because of the corporate uniparty, the merger between the Republicans, the Democrats, the neoliberalists, all of them thinking, oh, hey, we just open up the world. Everything will be great. We'll trade with everybody. Nothing bad will happen. Only good things will happen from free trade. And it's just been proven wrong. It's just been proven wrong. And it's really fascinating to me. I don't know when you were living in Seattle, but at the end, well, I know recently, but if you were there in the end of the 90s when they had the WTO protests,
Yeah.
and it was the black bloc left, sort of Antifa-esque, was there protesting. And what they were protesting against was the admissions of China into the WTO.
Yeah.
And their arguments were that there would be a race to the bottom, right? A race to the bottom on environmental standards, a race to the bottom on labor conditions, a race to the bottom on wages. And I'm not sure about the labor conditions thing, but I know for sure that as we offshored manufacturing to China, they increased their carbon emissions, and it was bad for the environment overall. And I do know that as we offshored all of our manufacturing around the world, it did cause a race to the bottom on wages. In fact, it just went, the wages went from good to not lower, but from good to zero, right? So
Yeah.
there was a total collapse to the bottom. And it's ironic to me to think that those guys were, quote, of the left, protesting against these policies that were being implemented at that time, protesting against Bill Clinton, protesting against the neoliberal sort of uniparty. And it turns out now that these are right side talking points now. And it's people on the right who are focused on the impact of globalization and what it means to the working class and the actual citizens, not actual, but we're all citizens of America, but the working class citizens of America in areas geographically that were, sort of the heart of America, the heartland, as it were. And it's just weird how everything has sort of like been turned upside down. And this whole discussion about class and the impact on the poor working people of America is just gone. And everything now is exclusively about how the United States is racist, and that's the biggest problem. Not that we've destroyed the economy from the inside, not that we've handed over all of our power to a uniparty beholden to corporations that don't care about us, not that any of those things. And they've obscured the conversation to the point now where it's just going to get worse. It's just going to get worse. The opioid crisis continuing. No, people aren't talking.
When's the
about
last time we talked about that? Exactly. Yeah. It's like gone. Yeah. I mean, I think, the awful truth is that in the minds of many policymakers, they're not going to tell you this, but in the kind of background of the minds of many policymakers, those are jobs that are disposable. And ultimately, those are people and cultures that are disposable.
Yeah.
And, no one's going to say that, but the actions kind of reveal that to be true. And it's like, I think, you look back at the 90s where you had, the Pat Buchanans and the Ross Perot's on the kind of populist right. You had the other folks on the kind of populist left warning about this stuff. And the idea was that, well, we're going to benefit tremendously as consumers, getting kind of reducing the kind of price of goods. And then we'll retrain and kind of redistribute the individual workers who are harmed. We can go to Target and buy stuff cheaply, like I do it, and I'm sure you do it, and everyone does it. It's like it's good, but the lie really was that the retraining of mill workers or whatever factory workers was going to be great and easy. I mean, I think they knew even at the time that was a lie.
Yeah, well,
I think it was.
They certainly didn't tell people. They weren't like, okay, guys, look, we're going to do this.
Yeah,
and the consequences are going to be generational carnage.
Yeah,
everybody ready for that?
And I think too, it's, there's some value in making things. And I think we saw that with the coronavirus where, people were like, where do we get our asprin from? And it's like 90% of our asprin comes from China.
Where do we get our insulin?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, whoa, this opens us up to be extremely weak, to have these massive weak spots. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that. And I don't know. I mean, Youngstown steel factories, steel mills are not going to come back. That's for sure. Definitely in the short and medium term. But I don't know. We'll see. Like, what do we want to be as a country? What price do we want to pay? Right? There's always a price to pay. And I think having been on the more libertarian kind of point of view earlier in my 20s and then having changed recently, it's like, you know what? I'm willing to pay a little bit more for a car or a toaster or a whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like the price, like the factored into the low price is a high cost. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, I'm kind of like interested in thinking of, balancing those things out, and not everything can be reduced to a dollar price. And, those are incentives, but I think values should be kind of higher than incentives in a lot of ways.